Have you ever experienced a moment when something happened so precisely at the right time that you could no longer simply call it a coincidence? Perhaps it was when you had just thought about someone and they suddenly appeared. Perhaps it was when you were standing at a difficult crossroads and the outer world unexpectedly reflected what you were searching for through an encounter, a symbol, or an event arriving at a strangely exact moment. Moments like these do not usually frighten us, but they are enough to make us pause and wonder whether reality might be unfolding in a deeper way than we have always assumed. It was precisely from moments like these that Carl Jung developed one of his boldest and most controversial ideas: synchronicity. In his view, some coincidences are not merely the result of probability, but rather the meeting point between inner life and the outer world, in a way that carries a particular depth of meaning. If that is true, then perhaps life is not simply a sequence of disconnected events, but also a subtle network of meaning quietly supporting your journey. Stay with me as we continue, because what you are about to discover may help you look back at the coincidences in your own life in a deeper way. 1. What is synchronicity? There are moments in life that, when remembered, cannot easily be explained by the familiar logic of, "It was just a coincidence." A meeting that seemed accidental yet arrived exactly when you felt lost. A sentence that appeared at the precise moment you were doubting yourself. A symbol repeating itself several times during the same period of inner transition. These moments are often not strange enough to be called miracles, yet not ordinary enough to be forgotten easily. They remain with us like unanswered questions. And it was from experiences like these that Carl Jung began reflecting on the phenomenon he called synchronicity. To understand the depth of this idea, it is first necessary to clarify what Jung truly meant when he used that word. According to him, synchronicity refers to the simultaneous occurrence of an inner psychological state and an external event, where the two are not connected by direct causation, yet are meaningfully related for the person experiencing them. Put more simply, this is not just any coincidence, but a coincidence carrying deep personal significance. What gives it weight is not the event itself, but the very clear feeling that it somehow relates to me. This distinction matters because Jung never denied the existence of chance. He did not believe that every unusual event was a mystical sign. On the contrary, he was careful and precise in his thinking. He understood that the world operates through causality, through probability, through logical chains of connection that science can describe. But he also recognized that there are experiences so exact in their symbolism, so precise in their timing, and so powerful in their psychological impact that explaining them with the simple word coincidence begins to feel insufficient. Not because logic is wrong, but because logic is not wide enough to contain the full depth of human experience. Perhaps you have been through a difficult period when none of your questions seemed to have answers, and then, unexpectedly, a book appeared at exactly the chapter you needed to read, or an old friend contacted you again, at the very moment you had been thinking about them. Events like these do not usually change the outer world, but they often change the way we experience the inner one. And at that point of intersection, Jung noticed something worth reflecting on. Perhaps the inner world and the outer world are not as separate as we have always believed. One of the most well-known examples Jung recorded took place during his work with a young female patient. She was highly rational and very intelligent, yet for that very reason she found it almost impossible to access the deeper layers of her emotional life. During one session, she told him that the night before she had dreamed of a golden scarab beetle. At the very moment she was describing the dream, Jung heard a faint tapping sound at the window behind him. He turned around and saw a beetle similar to the Egyptian scarab flying into the room, a species that was very rare in that region. He caught the beetle and showed it to her, saying, "Here is your scarab." That moment moved the woman deeply, because it broke through the rigid wall of rational defense she had held for so long. What matters in this story is not that the scarab carried supernatural meaning. What matters is that the coincidence between the inner dream and the outer event created a psychological impact strong enough to open the possibility of inner change. In Jung's view, synchronicity is not a sign of magic, but a sign of a moment when the psyche, the deep inner psychological life, becomes so alive that it seems to reflect itself into the outer world. When that happens, a person no longer experiences life as a sequence of disconnected events, but begins to feel that they are participating in a meaningful story. For this reason, synchronicity is not a concept meant to explain the physical world. It is a way of helping us understand our own experience more deeply. It suggests the possibility that there are moments when inner life and outer reality move into a subtle alignment that cannot be measured through ordinary cause and effect. This does not diminish the value of science. On the contrary, it expands the range of what we allow ourselves to perceive. At a deeper level, this idea shows that Jung did not see human beings as entities separated from the world. He asked whether our inner life might be connected to outer reality in ways far more subtle and difficult to grasp than we usually imagine. This is a large question, and also one that makes many people feel both curious and unsettled. Because if it is true, then the moments we once thought were random in our lives may carry more meaning than we ever expected. A reflection often cited in Jung's writings expresses this clearly. Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see. That sentence is not a mystical declaration. It is closer to a gentle invitation. An invitation to look again at the moments in your life through a different light. Not to believe immediately, but to begin noticing. Perhaps you have already had experiences that, when remembered, still feel not entirely accidental. Perhaps there have been encounters that quietly changed the direction of your life, without you understanding why at the time. Perhaps there were small signs that remained in your memory longer than many larger events. These things do not always need immediate explanation. Sometimes they only need to be recognized as subtle points of connection between the inner world and the outer world, as moments when life itself seems to speak to us through a symbolic language. Synchronicity, in that sense, does not ask us to believe something new. It simply invites us to revisit an old question. Is everything meaningful in life always explainable through cause and effect? Or are there moments when meaning appears before we even understand where it comes from? And if synchronicity truly exists in the way Jung suggested, then perhaps the next question is no longer whether those moments were accidental, but what they may have been trying to say to you before you were ready to listen. If you want to explore what makes this idea one of the most unsettling reflections on the nature of reality, the next part may lead you to see the coincidences in your own life in a completely different way. 2. What if reality does not operate only through cause and effect? A very deep belief has shaped the way most of us see the world since we were very young. Everything that happens has a cause. Every outcome comes from a chain of prior influences. Every event can be traced backward, like gears inside a vast machine, operating according to clear and predictable laws. Thanks to that belief, modern humanity built science, technology, medicine, and even its sense of control over life. But sometimes, within that seemingly logical flow, moments still appear that make us pause. Encounters that arrive so precisely on time are difficult to explain. Symbols that repeat exactly when something deep inside is shifting. Outer events that seem to mirror something profoundly private within us. It is here that Carl Jung began to ask a question that leaves many people feeling both curious and unsettled. What if reality does not operate only through cause and effect? In Jung's view, the law of causality is not wrong, but he felt it was not the whole picture. After observing human psychological life over decades of working with patients, he recognized that there are moments when two events do not cause each other in any physical sense, yet still meet within a structure of deep meaning for the person experiencing them. From those observations, he introduced the concept of synchronicity as another connecting principle existing alongside causality. A principle based not on physical force, but on meaning. And in a line of thought very characteristic of the way he viewed the world, he wrote, "Synchronicity reveals the meaningful coincidence of inner and outer events that are not themselves causally connected." When we read that sentence a little more slowly, we may begin to realize that what Jung was suggesting was not something mystical, but a more subtle possibility about the structure of reality. That idea may sound strange until we look at very ordinary experiences. When I think of this, I am reminded of Annie's story. She was a woman around 42 years old, working in interior design in Chicago. From the outside, her life seemed fairly stable. A good enough job, a warm little apartment, a close circle of friends. But for many years, Annie had carried a vague feeling that she was living a life more suited to other people's expectations than to herself. After a breakup that had stretched on for years, that feeling became clearer. She began asking questions about her direction, about the choices she had made, and about whether something inside her had been waiting to be heard. One weekend afternoon, while organizing an old bookshelf, Annie accidentally found a notebook she had written in when she was 20. Inside were lines about her youthful dreams, studying art therapy, working with children, and spending more time in creative activities with a healing quality. What surprised Annie was not only the contents of the notebook. What made her stop for a long moment was what happened right after. When she left the house to take a walk, she stepped into a small bookstore she had never entered before. The first book she saw on display was about art therapy for children. That moment did not change Annie's life immediately, but it created a very clear feeling that something within her was being reflected outward. If we look at this event through the lens of causality, we might say it was only a coincidence. An old notebook happened to be found. A bookstore happened to be along her path. A book happened to be placed where it was easy to see. But what interested Jung was not the physical chain of causes behind those events. What caught his attention was the meeting between Annie's inner state and the outer event occurring at the exact moment she was standing at a turning point in her life. From the perspective of synchronicity, this is an example of connection through meaning, not through cause. In Jung's analytical psychology, moments like this often appear when the ego begins listening to deeper parts of the psyche that it had previously ignored. When a person enters a phase of inner transformation, the outer world sometimes begins reflecting that process through symbols, encounters, or suggestive events. This does not mean the world is sending messages in a supernatural sense. It means human consciousness is becoming more sensitive to structures of meaning that have always existed around it. Perhaps this is exactly where Jung's theory becomes disturbing for many people, not because it says mysterious forces are controlling our lives, but because it reopens a very basic question. Is reality truly nothing more than a chain of physical events following one after another? Or does another layer of structure exist in which meaning also functions as a connecting principle? When that question appears, the familiar boundary between inner and outer begins to soften a little. What we think of as entirely subjective may not be as separate from the objective world as we once imagined. When Annie walked out of that bookstore that day, she did not immediately change her job or make a major decision, but she began paying closer attention to the things that made her feel something was meaningful. She began writing down moments that made her pause longer than usual, and gradually, over many months, small choices began shifting the direction of her life in a very natural way. What matters is not whether that original event was synchronicity in some absolute sense. What matters is that the moment helped Annie feel that her inner life was not entirely separate from the world she was living in. Perhaps it was from experiences like these that Jung began suggesting that human beings are not merely observers standing outside reality. We may be participating in a wider structure of meaning that sometimes reveals itself only in very small moments. And if that is true, then the next question becomes very natural. How do we recognize when a coincidence genuinely carries meaning for us, and when it is simply randomness moving through the familiar flow of everyday life? Let us continue into the next section, which may begin to make you see the familiar signs around you in a different way than you ever have before. 3-4 signs of recognizing a synchronicity. Just as when you accidentally turn the dial of an old radio in a quiet room and suddenly hear a familiar song arriving on the same frequency your heart has been remembering, there are moments in life that carry a similar feeling, not because you made the song appear, and not because the radio knows what you are thinking, but because in a very particular moment, something inside and something outside seem to meet on the same wavelength. These moments are often subtle and quiet, yet they leave behind a feeling that is difficult to forget. And it is precisely that feeling that leads many people to ask, how do we know whether a coincidence is just random, or whether it is what Carl Jung called synchronicity? To keep this concept from being understood too broadly or misused as an explanation for every unusual thing that happens in life, Jung set out very clear conditions. According to him, an experience can only be considered synchronicity when it contains a special structure made up of several elements at once. The first element, and also the most foundational, is the simultaneous appearance of at least 2 events belonging to 2 different levels of human experience. One event belongs to inner life. It may be a dream, an intuition, an obsessive thought, or a strong emotion. The other event takes place in the external world, such as an unexpected meeting, a repeatedly appearing symbol, or information arriving at exactly the moment you need it most. When only outer events happen to match other outer events, the experience may still be interesting, but it is not yet enough to become synchronicity in the sense Jung meant. The second element is the absence of a direct causal relationship between those 2 events. This is the point that confuses many people the most when approaching the theory. In synchronicity, the inner state does not cause the outer event in a physical sense, and the outer event does not create the inner state in the familiar linear way. There is no clear line of cause connecting them. But what is striking is that the person experiencing them still feels a very strong relationship between the two. A relationship not grounded in logic, but in meaning. The third element, and also the most important one, is symbolic meaning. The two events do not simply occur at the same time. They mirror one another in a way that makes the person feel they belong to the same deeper story unfolding in their life. This meaning is not something imposed from the outside. It is felt from within. It resembles a quiet but unmistakable resonance in the inner life, letting you know that the moment is not entirely accidental. Finally, there is the element of timing. The two events need to occur close enough in time to create a sense of parallel movement. If the gap is too large, the experience loses much of synchronicity's distinctive force. When they happen near each other, the person often feels as though inner life and the outer world have just touched in the same movement. It is this structure of inner event, outer event, a causality, meaning, and timing that makes synchronicity different from ordinary randomness. Jung did not see such experiences as proof of something mystical, but as signs that the human psyche may be relating to reality in more subtle ways than we usually imagine. In a very concise but deeply suggestive formulation, he described synchronicity as an acausal connecting principle. That phrase opens a very profound possibility. Perhaps another kind of connection exists in life, one based not on cause, but on meaning. One striking example Jung recorded during his observations involved the symbol of the fish, a symbol of great depth in analytical psychology. During a certain period of his life, Jung noticed that the image of the fish kept appearing around him in many different contexts. He dreamed of fish, read passages about fish in books he was studying, heard others talk about fish in conversations that seemed completely random, and even received gifts connected with this image during the same span of time. If we look at each event separately, all of them can be explained by probability. But when Jung viewed the entire sequence together with his inner psychological state at that time, he realized that the fish symbol was reflecting a deeper inner process unfolding within him. In Jung's understanding, a symbol is not just a decorative image in psychic life. A symbol is the language of the unconscious. When a symbol appears repeatedly in different forms and within a short period of time, it may be a sign that the psyche is trying to bring some inner content from the depths up to the surface of consciousness. In Jung's case, the chain of events involving the fish was not a disconnected series of coincidences, but a symbolic synchronicity. It reflected a period of inner transformation he was passing through, a period in which consciousness and the unconscious were beginning to enter into dialogue in a new way. Experiences like this do not always occur with the same intensity as in Jung's story, but many of us have had similar moments in smaller ways. It may be a dream that appears precisely when you are torn over an important decision. It may be an encounter that makes you look again at a part of your past you believed had already closed. It may be a symbol that appears repeatedly over several days in a way you simply cannot ignore. These moments are usually not dramatic, but they are deep enough to make you stop and wonder whether something is being connected beneath the familiar surface of life. Synchronicity does not require you to immediately believe in a new worldview. It only invites you to pay a little more attention to those moments when life seems to take on a structure of meaning greater than usual. And sometimes that attention alone is enough to open a different way of seeing your own journey. Perhaps what you once thought was random actually belongs to a deeper story that you are only beginning to recognize. The next section may surprise you, as it explores why such moments often appear at the most important turning points of life. Four, the outer world and the inner world may be connected. Life changes often do not begin with a dramatic event, but arrive very quietly, like the moment you realize that you are still going to work every day, still fulfilling your responsibilities, still keeping the familiar rhythm of your life. Yet inside, there is a difficult-to-name feeling that something is no longer quite the same. It is in moments like these, when outer life continues operating while inner life begins moving in a different direction, that Jung started paying attention to a phenomenon that led him to a thought far more daring than traditional psychology of his time was ready to accept. Perhaps mind and reality are not completely separate in the way human beings usually assume. As he observed the phenomena he called synchronicity, Jung realized that there are times when an inner state appears simultaneously in the form of an outer event without any direct causal relationship between them. A symbolic dream appears just before an important encounter. An intuition arises before unexpected news is revealed. A symbol repeats itself over many days, exactly when someone is standing before a life-changing decision. These moments cannot be explained simply by the familiar chain of physical causes. And because of that, Jung began to ask whether there might be some kind of deeper correspondence between psyche and world that we usually do not notice in daily life. What matters is that Jung never said human thoughts create the world in any direct sense. He did not move in that simplified direction. What he suggested was far more subtle. He proposed that both inner life and outer reality may arise from a deeper common ground, and that in certain special moments, the correspondence between them becomes clear enough for a person to feel it. From here, he introduced an idea that may be one of the boldest hypotheses in all of his work. Unus mundus, meaning one unified world. In this view, mind and matter are not two completely separate entities, as we often assume. They may be two different expressions of the same unified reality at a deeper level. That does not mean every thought becomes an external event, but it does suggest that in certain moments, the division between inside and outside may become thinner than we imagine, and it is in those moments that synchronicity appears as a sign that the unified ground of reality is showing itself through human experience. This idea carries Jung's theory beyond the boundaries of psychology alone. He was no longer concerned only with how the mind works, but began asking a much deeper question. What is reality? And where does the human being stand within it? When an inner state can appear alongside an outer event in a meaningful structure, the boundary between subject and world is no longer as completely clear as before. And it is here that synchronicity stops being merely an interesting psychological phenomenon. It becomes a philosophical doorway opening onto a different way of seeing the relationship between the human being and the world. It is something like standing in a dense forest in the late afternoon, trying to find your way out. When you are too deep in the woods, every direction looks the same. Every path seems to lead somewhere, but may also lead back to the place where you began. In that state, a person often feels completely cut off from the rest of the world, but sometimes all it takes is a small opening between the trees, and suddenly you catch sight of the light of the sky in the distance. That light does not create a new path. It simply shows you that there is a direction you had not seen before. Synchronicity may work similarly. It does not change reality, but it changes the way you recognize where you are standing within reality. When Jung proposed the hypothesis of unus mundus, he was not trying to prove that the world has a metaphysical structure in a religious sense. What he was doing was opening the possibility that reality may be a far deeper whole than what our senses and everyday logic usually allow us to grasp. And if that is true, then moments of synchronicity may be those rare points of intersection where that underlying ground becomes visible in personal experience. For this reason, he saw such experiences not as strange things demanding explanation, but as signs that the psyche is participating in a wider order of meaning. This also helps explain why many people who go through a genuine synchronicity do not feel only surprise. They feel connected, not connected in a social or interpersonal sense, but connected in a deeper way to their own life. A feeling that what is happening outside is not completely foreign to what is moving within. And sometimes that feeling alone is enough to change how a person looks back at their past, looks into their present, and steps into their future with a different kind of attention. It is here that Jung's theory begins to become controversial. The deeper he went into this idea, the further he moved from a purely materialist explanation of reality. He did not reject science, he did not reject logic, but he suggested that another layer of structure may exist within reality, one that human beings touch only in particular moments. And if that is true, then synchronicity is no longer just a strange phenomenon in psychic life. It becomes an invitation to rethink the entire relationship between oneself and the world. In a deeply insightful reflection on the nature of the relationship between psyche and world, Jung wrote, "The psyche and matter are contained in the same world and are in continuous contact with one another." When we read that sentence a little more slowly, we may begin to feel that what he is saying is not some distant philosophical claim. It is more like a reminder that seemingly small moments in life may sometimes be those rare points of contact where a person realizes they are not entirely separate from the reality they are living in. And perhaps it is precisely from those very gentle points of contact that a new question begins to arise. If the inner world and the outer world really can meet in such a subtle way, then what happens during those times when life itself enters its most important turning points? Five, why does synchronicity often appear at the turning points of life? One very striking thing is that experiences of synchronicity do not usually appear when life is smooth and familiar. They rarely emerge on days when everything continues along its old path, when a person is still fully living inside familiar roles and has not yet needed to question who they are. Instead, they tend to appear at moments when something deep within a person is changing, when a relationship ends, when a major choice must be made, when a job that once carried meaning no longer does so, or when an old identity begins to feel too narrow for the person someone is gradually becoming. It is precisely in such moments that synchronicity appears, not as a random event, but as a subtle sign that inner life is entering a phase of transformation. This fits completely with the way Carl Jung understood human psychological growth. Throughout his work, Jung consistently emphasized that human beings do not live only to adapt to society. They live to become more fully themselves. And that process, which he called individuation, rarely unfolds in complete stability. It usually begins with disturbance, a sense of being out of rhythm, a question that has not yet found an answer. a rupture that makes it impossible for a person to go on living as before without looking back at themselves. During such phases, the boundary between consciousness and the unconscious becomes more fluid. Things that were once overlooked begin to stand out more clearly. Symbols that were once dismissed as random begin to feel meaningful. Encounters that seemed ordinary begin to leave a deeper mark. And within that expanded psychological space, synchronicity becomes more likely to appear than usual. Mary was a 50-year-old woman living in Boston. For more than 20 years, she had worked for an insurance company with a kind of stability many people admired. The job gave her a sense of safety, but not a sense of aliveness. When her children grew up and left home, Mary began to realize that most of her life had been built around responsibilities that were no longer present in the same way. The emptiness that appeared did not feel purely negative. It felt like a question she did not know how to begin answering. In the months that followed, Mary often dreamed that she was standing before a small path in a forest she had never walked before. The dream repeated itself many times. At first, she thought it was just a random image of her imagination. But then one afternoon, while stopping by a community library near her home, she happened to see a poster advertising a volunteer training program supporting middle-aged women through career transitions. What made Mary stop and stare was not the program itself, but the image on the poster. A small path through a forest, almost identical to the image in her dream. That moment was not a miracle. It did not force Mary to change her life immediately, but it created a very clear feeling that something inside her was trying to be seen. And from Jung's point of view, experiences like this often appear when the psyche begins entering a stage of restructuring, when the old identity is no longer enough to contain the person forming within. The unconscious begins searching for other paths through which to communicate with consciousness. In analytical psychology, individuation is not a linear process. It does not unfold according to a plan that can be predicted in advance. It often begins in uncertainty, in the feeling that what once felt right no longer feels right. And it is precisely in such moments that the psyche becomes more sensitive to structures of meaning in the surrounding world. Things that were once dismissed as random begin to become noticeable signals. Things that were once ignored begin to carry the feeling that they need to be listened to. Synchronicity often appears at such times not because the outer world has changed, but because the way a person relates to the world begins to change. When someone's inner life is rearranging itself, outer events are no longer seen merely as things that happen in a disconnected way. They begin to be experienced as echoes of the same deeper process unfolding within. And it is that resonance that creates the special sense of meaning many people describe when they go through a true synchronicity. This also helps explain why such experiences often leave a lasting impression. They do not appear when a person is closed. They appear when a person is opening. When one part of an old identity is receding to make room for another part not yet fully formed. When someone is standing between two versions of themselves and does not yet know which direction to take. In such moments, any sign of meaning becomes more powerful than usual. Mary did not decide to join the training program that very day, but she carried the image of that small path with her for many weeks afterward. She began paying closer attention to the things that made her feel connected to herself. She started making time for activities she had postponed for years. And gradually, over many months, she realized that what she was truly seeking was not a new job, but a new way of living more aligned with the person she was becoming. It is in moments like these that synchronicity stops being merely an intriguing phenomenon. It becomes a sign that a process of psychological transformation is taking place. Jung expressed this with a very profound observation when he wrote, "In each of us there is another whom we do not know." When we read that sentence in the context of life's turning points, we begin to understand that synchronicity sometimes appears as a way for that unknown part of the self to find its way into conscious life. And perhaps that is why such experiences often arrive at the most vulnerable, yet also the most potentially transformative moments in life. Not to give us answers in our place, but to help us realize that we are entering a new phase of ourselves. In the end, the next part may lead you to look back at all the coincidences in your life in a completely different way. 6. If synchronicity is real, how does it change the way you see life? If we allow for at least the possibility that synchronicity may exist, then the way we see life changes significantly. First of all, we no longer see reality as a completely disconnected sequence of meaningless events. We may begin to recognize that there are moments in life that seem to carry a different kind of depth, where what happens outside touches something very real within us. Not every moment is like that, but just a few such moments can be enough to create a subtle shift in the way we feel life itself. The first thing that changes is usually not belief, it is attention. When people begin to accept that meaning may appear in unexpected encounters, in repeating symbols, or in moments that seem outwardly ordinary, they begin to look at life with a different level of listening. What was once overlooked becomes more noticeable. What was once dismissed as a coincidence becomes more worth reflecting on. And that shift in attention is often the first step in a deeper shift in the way a person understands themselves. This does not mean that everything is a message, or that people should assign mystical meaning to every small detail. Clarity and sobriety are still essential. Jung always emphasized this in the way he approached synchronicity. He did not suggest that people abandon rational thinking. He only suggested that reason may not be the only instrument for understanding reality. When a person begins to accept the possibility that meaning may appear alongside cause, they do not become less realistic. They become deeper in the way they look at life. One of the greatest changes synchronicity brings is a shift in the feeling of one's place in the world. When people believe that every event is entirely random and unrelated to their inner life, they are more likely to feel that they are living in a cold and indifferent reality. But when they begin to notice that there are moments when the outer world seems to mirror something within them, they often begin to feel less completely separate from reality. A very light but very real sense of connection begins to appear. In the analytical psychology of Carl Jung, that feeling of connection is not an illusion. It is a sign that the psyche is entering a deeper relationship with itself. When a person begins paying attention to the symbols appearing in their life, they are entering into a dialogue with the unconscious. And it is precisely that dialogue that often opens new possibilities for inner growth. Synchronicity does not require people to change their entire understanding of the world, but it invites them to ask a very basic question again. Could life be richer in meaning than we usually allow ourselves to believe? That question has no single answer, but often, simply holding it in the mind is enough to change the way a person looks at their own experiences. This shift can be imagined like standing in a familiar room during the day and looking out through the window. The scenery outside is the same. The road is still there. The houses are still there. But when the sky begins to move towards sunset and the light changes, that same familiar landscape suddenly appears different. not because the world has changed, but because the light through which you see it has changed. Synchronicity may work similarly. It does not change the events of life, but it changes the light by which you look at them. At the same time, this theory also reminds us of the limits of human knowledge. Jung did not present a finished scientific model. He did not try to prove that synchronicity is a universal law that can be measured. What he did was ask a question, and perhaps the greatest value of synchronicity lies in that very question. It does not force people to believe. It compels them to think. In a reflection very characteristic of the way he viewed the relationship between psyche and reality, Jung wrote, "Meaningful coincidences are unthinkable as pure chance." That sentence is not an absolute declaration. It feels more like a reminder that there may be moments in life for which the explanation of mere probability is no longer enough to contain human experience. When a person begins to hold that possibility in mind, they often become more attentive to the times when life seems to touch them especially. They begin to notice that some encounters arrive more precisely than usual. Certain symbols repeat during important phases. Small events sometimes carry the feeling that they belong to a deeper story unfolding in their life. This does not make life more mystical. It makes life more alive. When people feel that their experiences may carry meaning beyond what is immediately visible, they often become more patient with themselves. They become more willing to listen to their intuition, and sometimes they also become more courageous in following directions they had never previously imagined. Synchronicity also changes the feeling of loneliness in a very subtle way, not because it proves that something is controlling our lives, but because it suggests that we may be participating in a reality far deeper than what we usually recognize. When a person begins to feel that, they often no longer experience themselves as completely separated from the world. They begin to see that what is happening in their life may belong to a larger process they are only beginning to understand. Perhaps that is why Jung never presented synchronicity as an answer. He presented it as a doorway opening onto the possibility that reality is not as simple as we were taught, and that perhaps we too are not as separate from the world as we have long believed. And sometimes, merely keeping that doorway open in the mind for a while is enough to change the way a person continues along their own path. Through the journey we have just taken together, synchronicity is no longer a strange concept or a hard-to-grasp hypothesis. It becomes another way of looking at your own experience, a way of seeing that perhaps those unexpected encounters, repeating symbols, and strangely well-timed moments in your life were not meaningless after all. And if there is one deepest healing message this journey offers, it is the feeling that your life is not fragmented and that you are not walking alone through the important phases of your own transformation. Perhaps you will begin listening more closely to your intuition, and perhaps you will realize that sometimes life is speaking to you in very subtle ways you had never noticed before. If, in your own journey, you have ever experienced a coincidence that made you pause and wonder whether it carried a special meaning, share your story in the comments. Your experience may become a source of inspiration for many others who are quietly searching for the same answers you are. And if this content touched you in some way, take a moment to like the video, share it with people who may also be standing at an important crossroads in life, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue together on these journeys into the depths of the psyche and the meaning of lived experience in the videos to come.